She had spent 40 years of her life serving food with a warm smile, but in just a few seconds, everything changed. Meet Martha Reynolds, a 60-year-old waitress at a small-town diner in Texas. A woman of simple habits, dedicated to her work, and known for her kindness. One cold, rainy night, she notices a homeless man outside, shivering, drenched to the bone. The world walks past him, turning a blind eye. But Martha doesn't. Without a second thought, she grabs a hot meal from the kitchen, pays for it with her own money, and steps outside to offer it to him. The man doesn't say much, just takes the food with a grateful nod. For a brief moment, their eyes meet, and Martha feels a sense of peace. Then the door slams open. The manager storms in, his face twisted in anger. "Martha, we don't serve people like that. You're fired." Her heart sinks. Years of loyalty and hard work, gone just like that. But what she didn't know was that this man was no ordinary homeless person. What would you do in Martha's situation? Let us know in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. That night, Martha Reynolds walked home in the pouring rain, her coat clinging to her like a second skin. She barely held back the tears, the weight of everything crashing down on her. The diner, the only place she had known for the last 40 years, was no longer hers. It felt like her entire world had crumbled in one cruel moment. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse close to her side, the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement echoing in her ears. She thought back to that moment, the manager's angry words. "You're fired." She hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye to the few regulars she had come to know so well over the years. She had always been a warm presence, ready to serve with a smile. But now, in a blink, she was just another out-of-work 60-year-old in a world that didn't seem to have room for her anymore. The shame of it all hurt more than the rain. She had done what she thought was right, helping that man. But the consequences were unbearable. Bills piled up at home, each one staring at her from the counter like a relentless reminder of the life she couldn't afford anymore. Rent was due in just a few days. She didn't have a penny saved. How was she supposed to survive? Martha had always been proud of her independence, but now she felt like a failure. The job search was brutal. Day after day, she walked from one place to another, resumes in hand, hoping for any glimmer of hope. But the responses were always the same, rejection after rejection. Some didn't even look at her resume. The look of disbelief in their eyes, the subtle glance at her age, made it clear. No one wanted to hire a 60-year-old waitress. She began to wonder if she was invisible in the eyes of the world. Her body ached with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. If she did, the reality would set in. And then, doubt crept in, quietly but strongly. Was helping that man the right thing to do? She had been so sure, but now, with the weight of her situation bearing down on her, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had made a mistake. Was she just naive? Was it worth it? As she trudged through the streets, barely able to see through the downpour, the feeling of being lost, alone, and hopeless grew stronger. But then, out of nowhere, something shifted. A flash of light caught her eye. A car, sleek and dark, speeding down the street. The driver's face. She thought she recognized him. It was the homeless man from the diner. But how could that be? What was he doing here, in this part of town, driving such an expensive car? Martha froze, her heart racing. Her mind couldn't make sense of it. The man had looked so ordinary, so lost. But now, everything seemed off. She couldn't help but wonder, what if he wasn't just a homeless man? But before she could think any further, the car vanished into the distance, leaving her standing in the rain, her breath shallow, her mind spinning. Martha stood there, drenched and confused, watching the taillights disappear into the night. What did she just see? Was it possible? Was this all some twisted coincidence, or had she unknowingly crossed paths with someone far more powerful than she could ever imagine? The thought of it made her stomach churn. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change again. But how? And why? As she turned to walk home, her steps slowed. The night suddenly felt darker. Something wasn't right. Would Martha get the answers she was desperately seeking? Or was this just the beginning of something much bigger? The next morning, the sky was still gray, the remnants of last night's storm hanging in the air. Martha sat at her small kitchen table, a mug of coffee in her hands, staring at the bills scattered before her. The faint scent of wet earth crept through the open window, but it did little to ease the weight on her chest. The world outside felt distant, as if she were standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite understand. The knock on her door came, without warning. Martha stood up, her heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't even stepped out of the house. But there it was again, the knock, louder this time, persistent. Confused, she walked over to the door and hesitated for a moment before opening it. And then she saw it. A shiny black car, sleek and polished, parked at the end of her driveway. It looked like something straight out of a movie, an expensive, high-end vehicle that belonged in a world Martha could only dream of. A man stepped out from the driver's side. He was tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in a dark, tailored suit that looked like it had been custom-made. The kind of suit that made people notice. The kind of suit that screamed wealth. He moved with confidence, as if he owned the very air around him. But it was his face that made Martha's stomach drop. The man walked toward her door, and with each step, her heart sank deeper. It was him. The same man. The homeless man from last night. The same tired eyes. The same worn features. The same quiet presence. But now he was someone else entirely. Martha Reynolds, the man asked, his voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable power. Martha didn't know what to say. She stood there, stunned, barely able to comprehend what she was seeing. She could barely find the words to respond. Yes, she managed to whisper, her voice shaky. The man nodded, and a small, almost amused smile played at the corners of his lips. You're probably wondering why I'm here. Martha blinked, her mind racing. Why was he here? What could he possibly want with her? The questions swirled in her head, but before she could ask any of them, he spoke again. My name is Jonathan Kensington, he said, his tone cool and collected. I'm the CEO of Kensington Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company. And I believe we need to talk. Martha's mind spun.
CEO?
Fortune 500? What was going on? This wasn't possible. This man had been sitting outside her diner, hungry, cold, and homeless the night before. And now he was standing in front of her door, dressed like a millionaire. Her body went cold as she tried to process what he had just said. She couldn't make sense of it. None of it added up. Jonathan Kensington didn't seem in a rush. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face, as if reading every emotion that crossed her expression. I know this is a lot to take in, he continued, his voice gentle but firm. But I want to explain why I came here. Martha's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the blood rushing to her head. She took a step back, still struggling to find the right words, but she couldn't stop the flood of confusion and disbelief that overwhelmed her. I don't understand, she finally said, her voice cracking. I don't understand any of this. Jonathan's gaze softened, just for a moment. I know. But trust me, there's a reason I'm standing here right now. It's not just a coincidence. Martha blinked, her pulse quickening. The questions in her mind piled up faster than she could sort through them. What did he mean? What was happening? But before she could ask another question, Jonathan raised a hand to stop her. I know you have questions, but let me explain. He paused for a moment, gathering his words. The truth is, I've been watching you. For a long time. Martha's eyes widened, a chill crawling up her spine. Watching her?
How? Why?
Jonathan took a breath, his next words deliberate, heavy with meaning. The reason I was outside that diner last night wasn't by accident. I wasn't just some homeless man in need of a meal. I've been watching you because I've been impressed by your kindness, by your heart. Martha stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Her thoughts raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was he playing some kind of game with her? Jonathan took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. And that's why I'm here, Martha. I want to offer you something. Something that could change everything for you. Martha felt a tightness in her chest. What could this man possibly offer her? What could he say to make this all make sense? Her mind was in turmoil, every instinct screaming for answers. But all she could do was stand there, waiting for him to continue. I know things haven't been easy for you, Jonathan said, his voice softening. The bills, the rejection, the struggle. But I can help you. I want to help you. All you have to do is trust me. Martha's mind raced. Could she trust him? Could she trust a man who had shown up on her doorstep like this, so suddenly, with no warning? What was his game? She swallowed hard, her breath shallow. Why me? Why are you doing this? Jonathan's eyes darkened, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Because you're not just any waitress, Martha. You're someone who sees the world differently. You have the ability to change everything. And I need you to help me. Martha's head spun. Change everything? Help him? Before she could ask another question, Jonathan took a step back, his face serious now. But you need to understand something, Martha. This isn't just about you anymore. There's more at stake than you realize. The words hung in the air, thick with meaning, and for the first time, Martha felt truly afraid.
What was he talking about?
What kind of danger was he hinting at? Her voice trembled as she asked, What do you mean? Jonathan's eyes glinted. The decision you make today will shape everything. Your life and the lives of others. Think carefully, Martha, because this is just the beginning. And with that, he turned, walking away from her door without another word. Martha stood frozen, the weight of his words crushing down on her. What had just happened? What was going on? And, most importantly, what was she going to do next? As the black car disappeared down the street, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. It had only just begun. What would Jonathan Kensington want from her? What kind of danger was lurking behind his offer? But most importantly, what was she going to do with the power he claimed she had? The choices ahead felt too big to ignore. Martha stood there, her heart still racing from the encounter with Jonathan Kensington. His words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, lingering and unanswered. The decision you make today will shape everything. Her mind felt like it was swirling. She had barely had time to process what had happened, let alone figure out what to make of it. Jonathan Kensington, a billionaire CEO of a Fortune 500 company, standing on her doorstep like he was about to offer her a second chance at life. The man who had been sitting outside her diner, shivering in the cold, was someone entirely different. He had lied, or maybe, just maybe, he hadn't. Her heart beat louder in her chest, but she wasn't sure if it was fear or something else. It had been hours since he left, and she couldn't shake the image of him in his expensive suit, standing there with that cold, calculating look in his eyes. The words he said still echoed in her ears. I can help you. All you have to do is trust me. Martha sat at her kitchen table, staring out the window, her thoughts in disarray. She hadn't moved much since Jonathan left. The weight of the situation had her rooted to the spot, unable to make a decision. What did he really want from her? What did he mean when he said there was more at stake than she realized? And why her? Suddenly, a knock on the door broke the silence. It startled her, and she nearly spilled her coffee as she jumped up. She wasn't sure what to expect anymore. Was it Jonathan again? Had he changed his mind? With hesitation, Martha walked to the door and opened it, and there he was. Jonathan Kensington. Again. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, something more serious, less distant. He wasn't smiling. Martha, he said, his voice still calm but carrying an intensity she hadn't heard before. I know this is overwhelming, but I need to explain myself further. Martha felt her stomach twist. She wasn't sure she could handle more of this. Her mind was already on the edge, but she nodded, letting him in. I'm listening, she replied, her voice tight. Jonathan didn't waste any time. When I was sitting outside your diner last night, I wasn't just hungry. I wasn't just some homeless man looking for a handout. I was undercover. I needed to see who, in this world, still had real compassion. True kindness. Martha blinked, trying to process his words. Undercover?
Compassion?
Was this some kind of social experiment? Was he testing her somehow? Jonathan continued. I've built an empire, Martha. I've succeeded in every way imaginable. But none of that matters if I can't find people who truly care. People who help without expecting anything in return. People like you. Martha felt a strange sensation in her chest. She had always considered herself a simple person. She never expected anything for the kindness she gave. But to hear a billionaire CEO speak of it as if it were rare, important even, was unexpected. I've been watching you for months, Jonathan said. And what I saw in you wasn't just someone who gives a meal to a stranger. It was someone who has a heart. Someone who would never turn their back on anyone, no matter how difficult the situation was. Someone who still believes in kindness. Martha's mind raced. Was this real? Or was she being manipulated somehow? She had always lived a quiet life. A waitress in a small-town diner. She didn't think of herself as extraordinary. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice lowering, making the air around them feel charged with tension. Martha, I want to offer you something. Something that will change everything. And I'm not just talking about your life. I'm talking about everything you've ever believed was possible. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. What kind of offer? Her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan's gaze hardened, and he paused before speaking again, choosing his words carefully. I want you to run your own restaurant. A place where you can do what you do best. Help people. Make them feel like they matter. A place where kindness is more than just a value, but a way of life. Martha felt her pulse quicken. A restaurant? But how? She wasn't some expert chef. She had no experience running a business, let alone a restaurant. Jonathan saw the look on her face and smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reassured her. It was confident, as if he already knew her answer.
Don't worry, he said.
I'll provide everything. The funds, the resources, the expertise. All you have to do is run the place. You can build it from the ground up, your way. Martha shook her head, her thoughts spinning. This was insane. She had no idea how to run a restaurant, let alone one that would change the world. But the idea was tempting. The thought of having something to call her own, something that could give her purpose again, made her heart skip a beat. Why me, Jonathan? She asked, struggling to wrap her mind around it. Why would you offer this to me? I'm just a waitress. Jonathan leaned in closer, his voice soft but intense. Because you're not just anything, Martha. You're someone who believes in something bigger. You have the ability to create change. And that's what I need. Someone with heart. Someone who can inspire others to do more than just take. Someone who can create a legacy. Martha's eyes widened. A legacy? Was he really asking her to build something lasting? Could she do that? I know it's a lot to take in, Jonathan said, watching her carefully. But this could be your chance to finally have everything you've ever wanted. Your own place. Your own dream. You just have to say yes. For a moment, all Martha could do was stare at him. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something huge, something terrifying, but also something that could change her life. Her mind raced, but she couldn't think straight. Could she do this? Did she even have what it took to make this work? But then she thought about the bills. The looming eviction notice. The years of hard work for nothing. Martha had spent so long fighting for a life that seemed impossible to keep. But now she was being offered something more than just a way out. She was being offered the chance to build something real, something meaningful. Her breath caught in her throat. But what if I fail? She finally asked. Jonathan's eyes softened, but his answer was clear. You won't. Not with the right people beside you. And I'll be right there, guiding you every step of the way. Martha felt a wave of emotions, fear, excitement, uncertainty. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but she knew that this was a choice she couldn't ignore. What do you say, Martha? Jonathan asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Will you take the chance? Will you say yes? Her hands trembled as she thought about it. Was she ready to make this leap? Was she ready to trust Jonathan and everything he was offering? Or was this all too good to be true? As the seconds ticked by, The silence between them grew heavier. Martha's mind was in turmoil, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change, whether she was ready or not. The question was she ready to take the risk? As she opened her mouth to speak, the doorbell rang. A sharp, jarring sound that cut through the tension. And just like that, Martha's heart stopped.
Who was at the door now?
And what did this sudden interruption mean for her decision? Martha stood frozen in place, her mind racing faster than she could keep up. She was in shock, staring at Jonathan Kensington, trying to process what he had just offered her. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Everything she had known up until this moment, the small diner, the long shifts, the never-ending bills, seemed to crash down around her. Was this real? Was she really standing here, being offered the chance to run her own restaurant by a billionaire? A restaurant that could change her life completely? The voice in her head whispered doubts. You're just a waitress. You've spent your life serving meals. What do you know about running a business? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. But they wouldn't leave. How could they? This was too big. Too much. Jonathan noticed the hesitation in her eyes, the doubt creeping into her expression. He stepped closer, his voice calm, yet filled with unwavering certainty. Martha, he said, his tone softening, I know this is overwhelming. But you've already proven that you have something that money can't buy. Heart. And that's more valuable than anything. The business side of things will teach you. That's why I'm here. We'll train you. You'll learn what you need to know. But your heart? That's something I can't teach. Martha's heart pounded in her chest. He was right. She had always believed that helping people was more important than anything. She had spent her life feeding strangers, listening to them, making them feel seen. Wasn't that enough? Maybe that was all she needed to make this work. But the fear didn't subside. The fear of failing, of not being enough. What if I can't do it? She thought. What if I disappoint him? What if she disappointed herself? Her mind flashed to the years spent caring for her late mother, to the dreams they had shared over cups of coffee at the kitchen table. Her mother had always wanted to open a small cafe, a place where people could find comfort, a home away from home. But life had been cruel. The bills had piled up, and the cafe never came to be. Suddenly, Martha felt a sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was grief. The memories of her mother flooded back, filling the space between her and Jonathan with an emotional weight she hadn't expected. Maybe this is it, Martha thought. Maybe this is what my mother would have wanted. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had to make a choice. Would she let fear keep her from her chance to make something of herself, to fulfill a dream her mother had left behind? Or would she take a leap of faith, trusting Jonathan and trusting herself? Jonathan must have sensed her internal struggle because he gave her a moment of silence. He stepped back, watching her with patience in his eyes. He wasn't rushing her, but Martha knew he was waiting for something. Waiting for her decision. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Time was running out. Finally, Martha looked up at him. Her throat was tight, and her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was something else there too. A flicker of hope, a glimmer of the possibility of change. I'll do it, she whispered, more to herself than to Jonathan. I'll take the chance. Jonathan's face lit up with a smile, the kind of smile that seemed to erase any remaining doubts. Good. I knew you'd say yes. And just like that, the decision was made. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Martha was swept into a whirlwind of change she never could have imagined. Jonathan wasn't just offering her money, he was offering her a chance to reinvent herself, to become someone new. The first part of the transformation was the makeover. Martha stood in front of the mirror in a high-end boutique, surrounded by a team of stylists. They were there to help her choose a wardrobe that would make her look the part of a business owner. At first, she was uncomfortable. This wasn't who she was. She was used to aprons, plain dresses, and comfortable shoes. Not tailored suits and heels. But as the stylist draped the fabrics over her, Martha started to see herself in a new light. The woman in the mirror was different. Stronger. More confident. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone with purpose. With potential. With each piece of clothing, She felt more like someone who belonged in a world she had never dreamed of before. A blouse here, a jacket there, nothing too flashy, but enough to make her feel like she could hold her head up high. And then came the shoes. High heels, something she'd never worn before, but as she slipped them on, she felt a surge of power. She wasn't just walking, she was striding toward something, toward her future. But it wasn't just about the clothes. Jonathan had arranged for her to attend business training. Every day, she learned something new about managing a restaurant, about customer service, about handling the finances. At first, it was overwhelming. She felt like a fish out of water. She was used to being behind the scenes, serving the food, not making the decisions. But slowly, with Jonathan's guidance, she started to get the hang of it. The first few meetings were exhausting. The spreadsheets, the plans, the numbers, they were all foreign to her. But Jonathan never gave up on her. Every time she struggled, he was there, encouraging her, showing her how to break things down step by step. It wasn't easy, but Martha began to see the pieces falling into place. And with every success, no matter how small, she felt more and more confident. One afternoon, as she sat at her small kitchen table with a notebook full of ideas, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She remembered something her mother used to say every time they talked about opening a cafe. "Martha, if I ever had a cafe, I'd make it a place where people could sit, relax, and forget the world outside. A place where they could feel at home, no matter what their day was like." Martha closed her eyes, her heart heavy with nostalgia. She could still hear her mother's voice, filled with hope and dreams that never came true. But now, for the first time, Martha felt like those dreams weren't lost. Maybe this was her chance to make her mother's dream a reality. To create a place where kindness wasn't just a value, but a way of life. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled, a sense of determination flooding her. She wasn't just going to open a restaurant. She was going to create a home. The phone rang, cutting through the moment. Martha glanced at the screen. It was Jonathan. "Are you ready?" His voice came through the speaker, filled with anticipation. Martha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey ahead.
"I'm ready," she said.
But what happened next would change everything. The big day had finally arrived. Martha stood in front of the newly renovated restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. The sign above the door gleamed under the midday sun. Martha's Kitchen. This wasn't just any restaurant. It was her dream come true, a place where anyone who was hungry, no matter their situation, could walk in and find a warm meal, completely free of charge. The concept was simple: serve kindness, and let the food speak for itself. It was the kind of place her mother had always dreamed of, a space where people could find comfort, warmth, and a sense of belonging. And now it was real. But standing there, looking at the bustling crowd gathering outside, Martha felt a rush of emotions.
Excitement.
Nervousness.
Fear.
She had poured her heart into this place, into every detail, from the menus to the decor. She wanted to make sure it wasn't just a restaurant, it was a home. She glanced around the restaurant, which was already filled with customers. The staff was running smoothly, everyone working together like a well-oiled machine. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she had been struggling to even hold a job. And now, here she was, her own boss, in charge of a thriving, bustling restaurant. Her mind drifted back to the moments of doubt, the moments when she had questioned whether she was capable of this. Could she really make it? Was she really cut out for this life? The answer was clear now. The door swung open, and a familiar face stepped through. It was her old boss, the manager of the diner. The same one who had fired her so ruthlessly for helping that homeless man. The same man who had told her she didn't belong in the restaurant world. He walked into Martha's kitchen with a look of disbelief on his face. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the beautiful space, the smiling customers, the bustling staff. And then they landed on her. "Martha?" he said, his voice a mix of surprise and confusion. "What? How?" He stumbled forward, his jaw nearly hitting the floor. Martha didn't move. She stood tall, a soft but proud smile on her lips. This moment, this redemption, had been a long time coming. It was a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. All the hardship, all the doubt, all the rejection, it had led her here. And now, in front of the very person who had torn her down, she felt more powerful than ever. Jonathan walked up beside Martha, his presence commanding. He had been with her every step of the way, from the business meetings to the renovations, and now he was ready to make the final move. "Actually," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm, "I think you're a little confused. I don't think you're the one who should be asking questions." Her old boss raised an eyebrow, completely thrown off. "What do you mean?" Jonathan smiled. "I bought the old diner," he said, letting the words sink in. "And now, Martha is the one in charge." Her old boss's eyes widened in disbelief. "You bought it?" Jonathan nodded.
Yes.
"And I'm proud to say that Martha is now my boss." The room fell silent for a moment, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. The shock on her old boss's face was priceless. He stood there, completely frozen, as he tried to process the information. Martha couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. She had never wanted revenge, never wanted to make anyone feel small. But seeing the man who had dismissed her standing there, completely stunned, was a kind of justice she hadn't expected. I don't understand," her old boss stammered. How did this happen?" Jonathan smiled. "It's simple. Martha is one of the rarest kinds of people. She has something most people in this industry don't. Heart. And that's why I knew she was the right person for this." Martha glanced at Jonathan, her heart swelling with gratitude. He hadn't just given her a chance. He had believed in her when no one else did. He had seen something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. Martha stepped forward, her eyes locking with her old boss's. "You always told me I was just a waitress, that I didn't belong in this world. Well, maybe it's time to rethink that. Because now I'm in charge." Her old boss opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face turned red with embarrassment, and he quickly turned and left the restaurant, his pride shattered. Martha watched him go, a mix of emotions running through her. Part of her felt sorry for him. He had clearly never understood what true kindness was. But another part of her felt liberated. And then the doors opened again, and this time, it was a wave of new customers entering. They looked around in awe at the cozy, welcoming atmosphere of Martha's kitchen. Some sat at tables, others lined up to the counter, all eager to experience what this place had to offer. It was official. This was her place. Her dream had come to life, and there was no turning back now. But just as the crowd began to settle in, a message came through Jonathan's phone. His expression changed, his brow furrowed. He looked at Martha, his eyes darkening. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Martha felt her heart drop. What could it be now? What was happening? And just as she was about to ask, Jonathan gave her a look. The kind of look that said there was something bigger at play. Something she wasn't prepared for. The phone rang again, and Jonathan excused himself. What was going on? And what did this mean for the future of Martha's kitchen? As Jonathan stepped away to take the call, Martha's eyes lingered on the message that had popped up on his phone. It was from a number she didn't recognize. The message was short, but it hit her like a punch to the gut. "I know what you did. You'll regret this." Martha's heart skipped a beat. What had she just walked into? The weight of the message that had flashed across Jonathan's phone still lingered in the back of Martha's mind. She tried to shake it off, but her heart kept racing. What could it mean? Who was threatening her, and why now? But despite the unease that tugged at her, she pushed those thoughts aside. Today was a day for something bigger. Today was about making her dream come true. As she walked through the bustling kitchen of Martha's kitchen, she couldn't help but smile. Every corner of the restaurant felt like it was filled with hope. The warm lights, the hum of laughter, the sound of plates clinking together, it was everything she had ever wanted. The doors opened, and in came a group of people, their faces worn, their clothes ragged. Martha watched as they made their way to the counter, their eyes hesitant, unsure if they belonged. But then something magical happened. The staff didn't hesitate. They greeted the newcomers with warmth, offering them a seat, a menu, and the promise of a meal. No questions asked. No judgment. Just kindness. Martha's heart swelled as she saw the homeless people take their seats. For so long, they had been invisible. But here they were seen. Here, they had a place to eat without shame, without fear of rejection. This was her vision. This was the dream her mother had talked about, the dream of creating a space where no one had to feel like they didn't belong. She looked over at Jonathan, who was quietly watching the scene unfold. His smile was small but proud. "I think we did it, Martha," he said softly. But Martha wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. She made her way to the front of the restaurant, her eyes scanning the crowd. And then she saw them. Her former coworkers. The ones who had mocked her, told her she was wasting her time, that she didn't belong in the restaurant world. They were standing by the counter, their eyes wide, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. At first, they didn't notice Martha. They were too busy whispering to one another, pointing at the people seated at the tables, at the homeless who were now getting their meals. Martha took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the moment. She walked over to them and they froze. Their faces went pale when they realized who was standing in front of them. "Martha," one of them said, her voice a mixture of guilt and disbelief. I had no idea. We didn't know." Martha shook her head, a gentle but firm expression on her face. "It's okay," she said. "I know you didn't understand. But now you do." Her former coworker looked down at the ground, ashamed. The others stood quietly, unsure of what to say. But Martha wasn't here to hold grudges. She wasn't here to make them feel worse. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "Why didn't you ever show compassion like this before?" The young woman who had once been her manager shifted uncomfortably, wringing her hands. "We were just doing what we thought was right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were keeping the place in order, you know? We thought we had to follow the rules." Martha nodded slowly. "I understand. But sometimes the rules are wrong. And when the rules make you turn away people who need help, then maybe it's time to rethink them." There was a long pause, and then another one of her former coworkers spoke up. "Martha, we were wrong. We should have helped. We see that now." Martha didn't say anything at first. Instead, she looked at them, really looked at them. She could see the regret in their eyes. She could see the change. And for a moment, she considered the possibility. Could they truly change? Could they really regret their actions? And then it hit her. No one is beyond redemption. She smiled softly. "You've all got another chance. You want to work here? You can. But you need to show me you're committed. You need to show me you're ready to work with a heart, not just hands." They looked at her, stunned. They hadn't expected this. But the relief on their faces was palpable. They nodded eagerly, grateful for the second chance she was offering them. Martha turned to the staff and addressed them, her voice strong but kind. "No one should be turned away because they're struggling," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "No one should feel like they're less than anyone else. We're all human. We all have a place here." The room was silent for a moment as her words sank in. And then the customers, both the regulars and the newcomers, began to clap. A slow, steady applause filled the room, and Martha felt a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't for her. It was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, who had ever been dismissed, who had ever felt like they didn't matter. She had done it. She had created a place of hope, a place of redemption, a place of second chances. But just as Martha was about to walk away and get back to her duties, the doors swung open again. A man in a suit walked in, his face serious. Jonathan turned toward him, his expression hardening. Martha's heart skipped a beat. Who was this? What did he want? She felt a rush of uncertainty wash over her. But before she could ask, the man walked up to Jonathan and handed him an envelope. Jonathan glanced at it, his face darkening. "It's from the investors," he said. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. What did this mean? Had everything she had worked for come to an end before it even truly began? The man in the suit gave them a look before turning to leave. Martha's pulse quickened. What was going on? Was this the end of Martha's kitchen before it even had a chance to grow? Jonathan stared at the envelope in his hand, his face grim. He looked at Martha, then back at the envelope, then back at her. This, he began, his voice low. This could change everything. Martha's stomach dropped. What had just happened? What did this envelope mean for her future? And was the dream she had worked so hard for on the brink of collapse? As Jonathan stood there, the weight of the envelope still in his hand, he finally looked up at Martha, his eyes intense with something that hadn't been there before, vulnerability. He took a deep breath, his voice now softer, filled with emotion. "You want to know why I do all of this, Martha?" he said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy truth. "It's because I was once in your shoes. I was homeless too. I know what it's like to have nothing, to feel invisible. And I promised myself, when I made it, I would never forget where I came from." Martha's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. The man who had helped her build her dream was once in the same position as the people they served. It was more than just business for him, it was personal. Jonathan continued, his voice cracking just slightly. Kindness can change a life. And the question is, what would you do if you were in Martha's shoes? Would you help a stranger, even when the world tells you not to? Would you give up everything to make someone else's life better? The room fell silent as everyone took in his words. The weight of his story, of Martha's journey, and of the people they were helping, it all felt so powerful, so real. And now it's your turn. What would you do if you were in Martha's shoes? Could you find the courage to make such a bold choice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your stories, your feelings, your reflections. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who might need that extra bit of hope, that spark of inspiration. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it changed something inside of you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will keep you thinking long after the screen goes dark. And remember, kindness does change lives. So, share this message, and let's make the world a little brighter, one good deed at a time. Thank you for being part of this journey. We'll see you in the next one.